Hi, my name is Genevieve, and for today's panel, I'll be talking to Desmond, Eric, and Nicole for Poetry Festival Singapore 2021. So now let me just introduce the three of our panelists here today. We have with us Dr. Eric Francis Tinsay Valles, newly minted PhD. He has published the poetry collections,
Thank you.
A World in Transit and After the Fall, Dirges Among Ruins, as well as co-edited Get Lucky, and an anthology of Singapore and Philippine writings, SG Poems 2015 to 2016, Animal Methodi, and The Nature of Poetry. So as mentioned just now, Eric received his PhD in writing, in English with a specialization in creative writing from the Nanyang Technological University, Singapore, and his dissertation focused on mediating trauma through short and long poetic forms. Eric is a director at Poetry Festival Singapore. Okay, we also have with us Desmond Francis Xavier Kon is the author of a novel, a quasi-memoir, 2 lyric essay monographs, 4 hybrid works, and 9 poetry collections. A former journalist, he has edited over 25 titles. Among other accolades, Desmond is a recipient of the IBPA Benjamin Franklin Award, Independent Publisher Book Award, National Indie Excellence Book Award, Poetry World Cup, Singapore Literature Prize, and 3 Living Now Book Awards. He helms Quirkle Line Press and can be found at desmondkon.com. And we have with us Nicole. Nicole K is a founder and editor of the Tapestry Project SG. She aspires to bridge the knowledge and empathy gap through first-person narratives and hopes that one day no one will ever feel the need to apologize for their health or justify the help for which they seek. Now, okay, we have some slides that we want to show all of you. First, Eric, our newly minted doctor in the house, has some theories and quotes about trauma that he'd like to just start off the session with. Yeah, so I will ramble on and I chat to Nicole and Desmond while Eric struggles with his technical issues. Actually, I wanted to tell a joke because I thought it was very funny that like Eric is a doctor in trauma, but you know, he's not really a doctor in trauma. He's a doctor in trauma and poetry lah. So it's I thought it was quite funny. Yeah, I was laughing as I was eating just now, thinking about how Eric is a doctor in trauma, but he's not really a doctor in trauma.
Yeah, in a certain sense, Jen, all of us are doctors in our own ways.
We're doctors in our own trauma, yes.
Yes, for ourselves and for other people. Yeah, when you talk to somebody and when you just try to listen as a friend, you are in fact a doctor and a physician to that person, to that other. Right, and can you see my PowerPoint?
Right yeah, now? We can see poetry as cure.
Yep. Right, so we live at a time of interminable trauma, right? Especially the past few months. Almost everybody here and people in our audience would have experienced the loss of a friend or a family member to COVID-19, or you've probably heard about people who've been severely affected by it. In my case, as I told people at a workshop recently, I actually witnessed the struggle of a former classmate of mine with the disease, and actually his fight with that dread virus happened online on Facebook. We were experiencing it in real time. This is one of the last pictures, ever taken of him in that ambulance, and he just actually we lost him. Maybe in just a matter of days, and that's how pernicious this disease is, and how important it is for us to take all the precautions and to make use of all the means that are made available to us to fight it. And a lot of people have talked about trauma in some way. Um, from the 1850s to 1960, did you know that there were about 300 entries on trauma in the New York Times? But from around 1965 to about 1985, there were more than 26,000 entries. So the experience of trauma and the way it's reported, look at they've ballooned over the past few years, more so perhaps in the past few months. And in the Straits Times in 2017 to around 2020, there were about 800 references to trauma alone, right? And there are some other current events that are related that I will touch on later. Later, these are common quotes about trauma for Dominic LaCapra, who's an authority on this subject. So if you are doing research on trauma theory, you need to check out his work. He said that trauma creates holes in existence, something which is similar to what Sigmund Freud said about it. I'll touch on it later. And Anne Whitehead had this big statement that trauma survivors face the paradox of describing in language something that exists outside of language, something paradoxical, and that all writers and weavers, storytellers have to grapple with. Um, Kathy Carruth is another authority on trauma theory, and she recommends new modes of reading and listening. Miriam Houghton, who is a specialist in performance art, um, recommends new forms of expression. And this goes beyond the Western arts. So there could be room for sewing, batik, maybe in our part of the world, kabuki, all sorts of, maybe the wayangkuli could be another means of expressing the inexpressible. And once again, through these art forms, we express some of our hangups, our frustrations with ourselves and with other people. And at the same time, inevitably, there is something that's suppressed. And I suppose we just make do with what we can um, in such a case. Trauma etymologically means wound from the Greeks. And like any sort of experience, it may be communicated through language, right? And among the uses of language, um, in many situations, especially in our time of insta poetry, uh, these hang-ups and frustrations can be expressed in verse. And as Jen mentioned earlier, I did some research on trauma theory, um, and I was considering how certain forms of verse, specifically the long poem and the verse novel, could be effective means of giving witness to and providing acceptance of the experience of trauma. And um, the main point that I'm trying to make in this workshop, and Nicole could corroborate later, and Desmond in the project of the Atelier of Reading, is that um, the best we can do is really to accept trauma in itself. And there are a lot of people who get into all sorts of neuroses, and their depression gets worse because they are in denial of that situation. And poetry, sewing, and the other arts can be another can be a constructive avenue for releasing these pent up emotions, because we can never really get rid of that traumatic experience. It will always remain with us in the subconscious. So we might as well um, try to live with it, right? I mentioned Freud. He talked about trauma as a breach in our psyche's defensive wall. It breaks through our protective shield, so we're most vulnerable. So how do you cope with it? By accepting that we are vulnerable, that there's a hole in our existence, um, and we just work our way around it. Walter Benjamin is a more recent theorist. He was pre trauma theory, but in a certain sense, he was a prototype trauma theorist, and he lived it as well, as he was trying to escape from the Nazis uh, in Germany. And he was saying that since we cannot really solve quote unquote trauma, um, we might as well relive it. And as you may have experienced or know, trauma survivors, like people who've been through World War II or the Iraq War, they relive their experiences in nightmares, right? So they can't really take it out of their system. So Benjamin suggests we talk about it or write stories about that experience. And if you're able to do that, then we would have learned to not really move on, but to live with that experience, because it's never gonna leave. Right? It's part of of our psyche, our makeup, um, and so he suggests in the act of writing that this trauma be re-experienced through the use of imagery, which could be neutral, because some people may find it very uncomfortable, of course, to talk about people who've traumatized them, or to think of objects that have caused them a lot of pain. Excuse me. So we can make use of images from nature, and we can weave and spin them in our work. Repetition is a strategy that's found in trauma survivors as they recount their experiences. And so it is in the act of trauma writing. We can use some repetition. It's inevitable, um, to emphasize perhaps certain points in our narrative. And I was alluding to how traumatic our times are, and this is rather alarming. Right? That more than one Singaporean every day does self-harm, right? And these are the reported ones, only the reported ones. And at the same time, there are plenty of initiatives to help people cope with the situation. Nicole will tell us something exciting and very helpful to a lot of people. In Scotland, here's another initiative. There's this group that is actually giving nurses and midwives who have just graduated from school a pocketbook of poetry that's uplifting to help them in the front lines. Um, and these are inspiring verses, right? And as I was mentioning in the workshop, so the traumatic experience is like dirt, like a smudge on the soul. And analogically, it can be like that the dirt that you have in oyster, but over time, that oyster gets to coated, um, and it grows with that bit of dirt. And in the process of its growth and its processing that obstruction um, in its body, it forms a pearl. And so it is probably with writing, poetry writing, storytelling, acts of weaving. Um, we can create something meaningful to us. It can help us reflect on our values and how we can actually locate that traumatic experience in the bigger picture of our being, and in the context of our community. Yeah, so in the case of poetry, we make use of imagery as suggested by Benjamin and other thinkers like Saint Augustine before him, and we try to set it to music. That's one of the elements in poetry, and we can try to express it with a strong voice of the lyrical speaker. And many trauma poems are narrated in the first person. They are dramatic poems. And one verse form that I especially recommend is one that I co-conceived with Desmond Kon, who is with us tonight, the Anima Methodi. But if we have time later on, we can talk about it in detail. But for now, it'll suffice for me to tell you that. So it's based on the philosophical ideas of Gabriel Marcel, an existentialist from the 1960s. And he posits that we can deal with any experience, especially traumatic ones, through two ways. One would be for us to process images about it, what we feel, what we see um, regarding that situation. Say you you witness a fire in Ishun, right? And how did you feel during that experience? What was the stench like? What did you hear as you were running down the stairwell of your flat or the building? And at a deeper level, right? So we try to process these bits of information from our senses, and we try to look at them with the mind and try to draw some insight, if we can try to draw some insight into that. Like, what is the essence of all those bits and pieces of details regarding the fire? Um, did it mean that we probably lost somebody in that tragedy? Or we could have lost some other things like our passport, and how that's going to make life very difficult for us in the future. Um, and this reflection, in the case of Anima Methodi, is done in two stanzas um, of 8 lines each, a total of 16 lines. In the first stanza, you have images of anything, any phenomenon. And as you develop those images, it is hoped that there could be some reflection on them. And there could be some denouement, right, or some insight um, towards the end. Although this is not uh, we don't aim for definite closure. It's impossible to do that in a work of art, as we were talking about earlier. But we try to. And in the course of this writing about trauma or any other experience, then we could actually um, get to delve deeper into those experiences, and what those experiences tell us about ourselves and our values, right? And yeah, and for those of you who have kids, you can make them join Write and Burn. It's a spoken word competition um, that's supposed to be cathartic. You can get more information from the Poetry Festival Singapore website. I'm sorry, the Facebook page of Poetry Festival Singapore. And of course, we have this Atelier of Healing, which we are launching during the Poetry Festival. Yes, and that's it.
Okay, thank you, Eric. It's interesting that you mentioned the tradition of writing in the first person. Yeah, because
Yes.
that's the Tapestry project also encourages a lot of first person, I think all of first person narratives. So we have Nicole to bring us through some slides about her journey and about the project. Okay, Nicole?
Thanks, Jen, and thanks, Eric, for sharing. I've learned so much in just that short little snippet. So much wisdom. Oh, okay. So I'm just gonna share my own personal journey. So, okay, here we go. So, as Jen mentioned, I'm from the Tapestry Project Singapore. This is something that I started in 2014. And it is I suppose a result of what I had gone through when I was much younger. So I was 23 at that time, and I had gone through a series of events that led to, actually I didn't really classify them as trauma, but then as I began to read more and more of it about trauma, I realized that, yeah, actually those are considered traumatic experiences. So oftentimes we think about trauma in terms of like post-war PTSD or something dramatic, but like what Eric shared, trauma is basically a wound in your psyche. And so here's how my story goes. So I have clinical depression and generalized anxiety disorder since 2006. I've been managing quite okay. And I guess maybe because I'm older and hormones, I guess, play a part. So, but in my family, mental illness actually runs in my family. So I have an immediate family member with depression. So according to psychiatrists, there's this theory that I am more genetically predisposed. So all it takes is, now that your nature has been set up, all you need is that nurture, the external factors to sort of trigger and, set off this underlying genetic bomb. Sounds scary, right? Well, that's science. So there are also biochemical imbalances. Before I removed my thyroid, so it's now gone. I am without an organ. But before that, I had hyperthyroidism, meaning that thyroid is overly active. So that adds to the anxiety because it makes me a bit more keyed up. I find it harder to relax. So there's that weird imbalance in my chemistry, body chemistry. And of course, social economic factors. So this kind of relates to my childhood and upbringing. I lived in a middle income family, father, mother working, both busy working, and I was considered a latchkey kid. So in primary school, right, they always call us latchkey kids, and that's something, a label that I've always had. But the good thing about it is that I've learned how to spend and enjoy time with myself, and that actually cultivated my love for reading and for stories. But I think I grew up in a family that was always arguing about money, about different things lah. Basically, my parents were very unhappy, and I think seeing their marriage fall apart had seeded something in me, which was this need for control. That as a young kid, I felt that, okay, I need to be able to do something to control this sort of turbulent family dynamic. And somehow, being the eldest child, I saw it as my duty to fix my parents' marriage, which is so silly lah. But I did blame myself a lot for causing a lot of issues between my parents. So I would take on this blame and such and such. So I guess that adds to my perfectionistic personality. So I can be quite harsh with myself. Before therapy, I didn't realize how that I set such high standards for myself, and I didn't realize that the core belief that I've developed from my childhood, from all these things, is that I will never be good enough, that I'm never good enough. So this drives me, and of course sends me into this awful slave driver mode lah. I can be kind to others, but not to myself. So I carried that into work. So I did pretty well in school. And then when I started transitioning from school to work at 23, life, of course, is not, textbooks don't teach you and they don't equip you for life. So I studied management in school, in university, which was not something I enjoyed. I did it because I was a Gyasu Singaporean and I wanted a very pragmatic degree that can guarantee me a job. And of course, I put a lot of pressure on myself to earn money for the family, just so that my parents would stop arguing. And it was like I saw it as a duty. So when I entered the workforce, it was a bank, and I had no idea what to expect. And it was a marketing department too. So at that age, I didn't realize what sort of person I was in terms of my values, in terms of, um, you know, what sort of environments would make me thrive. So when I was in this banking environment, I thought I was really lousy because I just didn't understand all these numbers. I didn't understand needing to do all these financial reports end of each month. I didn't understand the office politics where people would print out ridiculous poison emails and put them on above the printer. And it's just, I remember thinking that, feeling very scared and thinking, oh my God, is this what being an adult means? That you have to live with all these things happening. So while I was working, I was also assaulted, which I didn't report because I felt that um, basically no one would believe me because I was a young person. And then, yeah, and I was working overtime. It was a very toxic work environment. I was already doing overtime every day within the second week into my job. So either I was really bad at my job or that was the culture. So it wasn't, I didn't really think it was depression at the time. I thought it was just work stress. So I lost about 10 kilos in 5 months. And I just kept falling sick. I just kept having to take MC until the boss spoke to me and in a meeting. So he spoke to me and asked, well, like, why are you always on MC? And then in the meeting, he would tell the group, the department, that we're only as strong as our weakest link, things like that. And then he would look at me. So it's that sort of bullying culture. And in the end, I thought enough was enough, so I left. But by then, the depression had already set in. And so I had all these signs, the uncontrollable crying. Eventually, I was unable to leave house, so I had to quit my job. I, basically didn't want to talk to anyone. I tried telling my friends about this situation. And there was a lack of empathy at that time. This was 2006. So I remember this friend who commented, work only, So I think she was expecting something a bit more traumatic. So I felt that, maybe, and again, that self-blame comes into play, those old habits of thinking of, I'm a failure, I'm not perfect enough, I'm not trying hard enough. So that all comes into play. So again, with depression, it kind of robs you of that sense of who you are, the identity. So it didn't matter that I had an honors degree. It didn't matter that I was actively serving in church. It didn't matter that I was a good person or was a good friend. All people knew was that I couldn't cope with work stress. And that made me a weak person, a lousy person. So of course, I resorted to self-harming. So I have some scars here, which some people may see if they meet me in real life. So these scars are self-harm is out of frustration. But I did gradually move towards that point of wanting to end it all, because I felt, what's the point, right? If everyone's so unhappy with me, I might as well just leave. So in 2011, I felt really broken. This was my journey to recovery, whatever recovery means. In 2006 was when I saw that first doctor, and he's the one actually who said, Nicole, could it be possible that you're going through depression? And then he had asked me about my sleep, asked me about my family, and he wrote me a referral letter to see my first psychiatrist, who was really awful. I wish I could say that my first psychiatrist was the one who saved me, but no, she was, she didn't even make eye contact with me. And she was just looking through a series of forms, asked me to fill up some things. And then she said, here's a week of Prozac, take it and come back next week. So in my head, I'm thinking, okay, since doctor says so, I will do as doctor says. Came back the week after, and it was a different room. It was a much larger clinic, and there were like these little steps at the corner, like a mini auditorium. And over there, I saw about 10 to 12 interns with their clipboards scribbling away. And then she told me, don't mind them. They're just here to observe. They are just interns. So I thought, oh, okay. And I felt so humiliated because those people were my age, and she was just rattling off all my issues, and I just felt so dehumanized, and I felt that to her I was a statistic and just another case. So I swore off medication. I told her I was totally fine, which is a lie. So I swore off medication, and I thought maybe I'll go find a counselor instead. So I did pretty okay with my first counselor and psychologist, but it was a slow descent. And I didn't realize mine. That's when I knew that depression was more biologically driven for me, because even with the talk therapy, with all the counseling sessions, I was still descending into that dark space, but a bit slower. So 2011, I tried to take my life. My husband was there. He was running out of urgent leave already at that point, and I knew that at some point he had to go to work. And when he went to work, I knew that I would take my life. But for some reason that morning, he decided to stay with me and told his boss that, I'm just going to take unpaid leave because my wife is going through this thing. And his boss understood. So husband called the nearest hospital. And here's when I think divine intervention occurred. Usually for specialists, you have to wait a few weeks, right, before the specialist, the doctor sees you. So same for psychiatrists. It happened that morning that there was a doctor available already. So the customer service, is that what they call it? The person that spoke to my husband said, do you think you can wait for a few more hours because one of our psychiatrists is coming in? So I thought, oh, okay, I'm going to do it anyway. So I'll just wait so that my husband won't feel so bad and he'll feel that he tried, etc., etc. So that was the script that's happening in my head. In the end, we went to see the psychiatrist, and he was so different from the first psychiatrist. He was compassionate. He actually looked at me and he listened, he answered my questions. And I felt that maybe it's worth just holding on for a day more or 2 more days, So, and then long story short, he found the right medication that fit me. And I experienced for the first time a clarity. I could move on with my life. I could do something with my life. I felt a bit more like myself with the medication. So yeah, here I am today. And I didn't really tell people my story up front, like now, to strangers, to the World Wide Web. But it started with journaling. And I went on forums. And this is the thing I discovered, that the more I shared my story, the more freedom I found. And it was very cathartic. So I had moved from that state of brokenness to breakthrough. And the picture is still not pretty. It's still broken glass, but it has more color today. So, and that's how I define recovery. It's not a smooth thing. I still face battles, which is this very old, overused meme of Sparta. And yeah, basically my battles today is managing myself now, self-management, and managing other people's expectations, trying to educate people. So that's probably why I wanted to start the Tapestry Project, because I feel that these things are intertwined. And when we share our stories, we sort of create that space for other people to do likewise. And I think Eric just now showed a clip about a newspaper cutting on how suicide rates, especially among youths, are increasing. And I would joke with people that there's a lot of people who are at risk of mental health issues because of trauma or because of work burnout or transitions in life. So because of this number, I feel less alone. And yeah, but yet for some reason, no one's really talking about illness and trauma and healing. And my theory is that there are these factors. And these factors cause that it silences us. It keeps us locked into that space of shame and silence. And I feel that there are long-term consequences when you keep quiet about things. So that's why I feel that stories are very important. There's this Turkish-British novelist, Elif Shafak, who says that stories bring us together, but untold stories keep us apart. And that's how I see tapestry. That's why we try to share first-person narratives to sort of bridge that gap and to create that sort of shared understanding, that collective, a space where healing can take place. So this is some of our work. If you're keen, you can always visit the website. I won't go through it. The core of what we do is restoring, which is based on narrative therapy. And it's about telling our stories in ways that make us stronger, not necessarily positive or, like Eric mentioned, closure. So there's no real closure when it comes to trauma, but it's about telling stories in ways that strengthen us. And I remember a friend once told me, don't waste our suffering. You've gone through so much issues already, you might as well just do something about it. So here's our website, our social media. I try to speak up on press. And because of my experiences, I feel that it's important that we go beyond numbers and start looking at people, start looking at narratives. And that's not my cat. I wish it was. So I see that writing our stories, right, is a process that turns this sort of mess into this, a tapestry. And that was the inspiration behind our logo. Here are some of our stories. These are written by people from all walks of life, young and old. If you want, you can check them out, but I won't go through them here. And this is a quote that I really hold close to heart. So I'm just going to read it out. For narratives to flourish, there must be a community to hear. For communities to hear, there must be stories which weave together their history, their identity, and their politics. So this is by Ken Plummer. And of course, if you want to be part of our tapestry, join us. Yeah, and let's not forget that you're part of someone's story. So yeah, thank you all for being part of mine tonight. And I will stop share my slides now. Over to you, Jen.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much, Nicole. I guess you get a lot of people who come up to you and say, wow, you're so brave for doing this. How does it make you feel? Like,
I don't actually feel that I'm brave, to be honest. So to me, I've been actually thinking about this idea of courage. Because it's like what you said, people say you're so brave to share this, but I've never quite seen myself as brave. I think it's only brave because when I started sharing my story, I had nothing to lose. And it was the only way to get it out. So I was doing it more for myself. So if anything, I would think it's selfish rather than brave. But now when I look back at it, the fact that I'm still talking about it when I have something to lose because I'm somebody or something, then I guess okay, I can feel my inner critic telling me that no, you're not brave, Nicole. So that's the backstory that's happening. So I guess I'm still learning to accept that yes, it is a brave thing to do, to talk about it on a public platform. Yeah.
I think it's a very courageous thing to do, because many psychologists and even literary theorists would say that trauma victims or trauma writers tend to be passive, right? Things happen to them or happen to us. And it's a brave thing to actually try to be an agent and tell your own story, or write a poem. And Nicole mentioned journaling. You can do something similar with poetry. Some therapists actually recommend writing a poem every day for, say, a week. about the same situation or the experience that you find very difficult to accept. And yeah, that's it's a brave thing to do. But maybe for the trauma victim, yeah, the trauma victim doesn't feel that at all. But in the act of actually trying to do something about it, yeah, you are um, coming to terms with it. Yeah. Congratulations, Nicole.
Thank you, Eric. So kind.
Yeah, I think Eric, I think you just touched on like very interesting aspect about writing. The writing as healing, writing as like transformative. The idea that you write on the same thing every day,
Yes.
like something mysterious clicks, and then maybe you find a different insight to that topic. Nicole, in the tapestry project, have you experienced that? Have like people come up to you and said that, oh yeah, you know, I've been living with this illness for such a long time, but like it's only now that I'm able to like not I don't want to use the word make sense, because it's just sometimes trauma is just something that you can't make sense. It's just, but maybe something that you like what Eric was, I think one of you was saying, like learn to live with as part of your existence. Does that resonate with you in the tapestry project?
Yeah, I definitely. It's not so. I know what you mean about the. It's not so much to make sense, but I think it's more to make meaning when you start to look at your story and you. It is part of you. It will always be part of you, but it doesn't define. It's not who you are as a person. There's so many other parts of you. So I remember when I gave a similar talk at a hospital, one woman came up to me during the break and she was crying, and then she was telling me that she's never told anybody about her depression and she's never heard someone speak about their depression before. So she was crying because she just felt such a release in this other person who was just like her. So of course I started crying, and the two of us were like just crying for the next 10 minutes, and then we had to go back. I had to go back on stage to do the thing. But it was such a, when she did that, it two things came to mind. Was how, number one, courage is contagious, and how, number two, that creates community. So I think I'm really very blessed that through tapestry I found these things.
Yeah, that's great, Nicole. And a lot of psychologists and therapists would recommend maybe 3 Ps for people undergoing depression or suicidal thoughts and feelings. And Nicole mentioned community, so pals would be very important, to have some support network with you, so you're not alone. And because if you're alone, you feel hemmed in with all your self-destructive feelings. But when you reach out to other people, uh, you feel some responsibility towards them. Like if you help, like in the tapestry project, you go to a nursing home and feed the seniors there. Yeah, you feel like you're part of something bigger than yourself. The other 2 Ps would be pleasure, listening to music. That is an upper for a lot of people, or going to parks. Bathing in was it forest bathing is a thing now in Japan and in many places. And with the opening of the park connectors here, yeah, there's so many places that we can go to, and we can get positive ions from the trees out there. So the second one is pleasure, and the third one is purpose. To find something higher, something bigger than ourselves. Could be, you can find that in religion for some people, or it could be writing, uh, yeah, or stamp collecting. Yeah, so that's something that can help you go on with life, right? And maybe Desmond somehow has some other things to say about that as well.
Are you a stamp collector, Desmond? Is that why Eric mentioned stamp collecting?
Yeah, I mean,
I'm sorry.
I think that
I'm sorry.
oh, I wish. I wish I had a go-to thing for, dealing with these things. Poetry does help, like in your presentations, the writing does help. But there's this, it's interesting because sometimes, like what Eric mentioned about how trauma is so ensconced in memory that it's very hard to forget it. And yet, you know, of being able to forget the past. Sometimes it's easy. The forgetting is even harder than the forgiving, right? And that coheres completely with what Eric was mentioning, and that's the tough thing. And it's not so easy to flip the anxiety switch off. I think sometimes when you have a support group and they try to tell you, get a grip on your own mind.
It's not always the case. Not so easy.
If you could just do it, it would be, yeah. As a switch off switch, it'll be great. But some of the advice that I've heard from people that really works is to make meaning what writing does, right? And all meaning, meaning the mood that is sort of you're trapped in, and also the harder part of just dealing with circumstances. And that's where I think a lot of cognitive therapists or narrative therapists will help. They can have very specific to their problem circumstances and think themselves out of it. Of course, it's not simple because it's physiological, and sometimes medication is really needed to help people with chronic conditions. And so it's just great that there's so many ways in which people can find help, which is the most important thing with situations like this, right? Just finding the help. Anyway, yeah.
But okay,
And yes.
No, so the question to the three of you, do you think that there is a point where language is not sufficient? Like, no, like the words are not enough to express what you're going through? Is there a limit to writing, to words?
Definitely. Because our language is impoverished, so it is actually a cause of anguish for poets and other writers to try to put down things that are difficult for them to actually describe. But we do so anyway. Just like painters continue trying to put down their fantasies. It doesn't matter whether they're imagists or fauvists, um, but they just do it. And so I mentioned earlier Walter Benjamin saying that we can use imagery, especially drawn from nature. So in that way, it's it's removed from our immediate experience, so we can actually talk about trauma obliquely, and that's one good thing about art, poetry especially, because we can describe nature or some other objects that we can associate with that, with a person who has hurt us, um, without actually describing that person. Yeah, so it gives us permission to be in touch with that experience, even if it's quite difficult. Yeah.
Yeah, if I might just add in, one of the interesting things about poetry is that it's quite different from therapeutic writing or narrative therapy, in that, and even in therapeutic writing, there's this sense that if you have a good guide, they won't tell you to just replay the events in your head or on the page, because that only brings you into this cycle of sort of. So writing has to be accompanied by the attempts to understand and contextualize so that you can get out of that issue, to be constructive. Poetry's poetry's way of navigating is that it uses aesthetics. It's almost like using the to and the glow, the joy of beauty helps alleviate your mood, you know. Anyway, so that's again just my take on it. Yep. So Jen, yep.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing up the poetry versus what was the word you used from writing?
Yeah, therapeutic writing.
Okay, therapeutic writing, because it's an interesting genre, and one that has really clear parameters, right? For like writing for healing. And Nicole, I was wondering whether in your workshops, when you conduct such sessions, like are there like specific like parameters, like okay, first you talk about your past, your trauma, then there must be a middle, and then after that there's this like redeeming, like victorious, like you end on a victorious high note, is like lesson learned. You know, like in primary school when we teach that kind of like narrative arc, is there some like arc that like you get people to follow?
No, the long and short is no. The thing is, for I mean, this is the trap that we tend to fall into when it comes to writing a story, right? And like what you said is what they teach in school. There's this arc, and more specifically, there's this pressure to conform to the hero's journey. Like, you know, you're in a terrible state, then some cosmic mitigating factor changes your life, and then you kind of live happily ever after, and there's this triumphant thing. Yeah, but for our workshops is more on journaling, and it's based on the narrative therapy framework, which means that it is structured in a sense that it's about learning the different. So we look at the tree of life, the narrative tree of life. We explore our roots, we explore our strengths, our aspirations, the people that matter to us, and we don't really quite go into the trauma bits because we feel that it has already happened. The journey itself is, what are we going to do about it? How can we look at this trauma in a way that makes us stronger? How can we retell this story so that it's meaningful now, rather than, you know, because you can't revisit and fix that, but you can take it and use it in a way that is more constructive for you, that can move you towards healing. Yeah, so that's what our workshops do. I also try to have some safety nets lah, because sometimes when we write, we end up ruminating. So we end up like writing the same thing again and again, like what Desmond mentioned. So we end up spiraling. So for our workshops, we do have some safety protocols, and I integrate different writing prompts to make sure that everybody is kept safe throughout the exercise. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's always difficult, like when you open up past wounds, like you don't really know where, I guess where your mind, sometimes where your mind and where your writing goes. Okay, so I think that therein lies I think the difference between writing for like poetry and a more like narrative therapeutic writing. Eric and Desmond, any comments on like what okay, maybe is this a good is it a good point to mention the book, the impetus of book, the Atelier of Healing. Maybe let's bring us through like why talk about healing and trauma, and why do this project at all?
But we had this call for submissions
on Reddit
2 years ago. Yes. And we had submissions from everywhere, and they were quite diverse, and they were talking about all sorts of situations, from conflicts within the family to interpersonal ones, like with friends and with society and the culture around them. And Des?
So was it always
Yeah,
intentional to
right.
focus on healing?
In a certain sense, yeah, poetry has been seen as a cure
Mm.
by the Greeks, right? And with the act of writing, uh, yeah. So there's a release of these negative emotions, especially through poetry.
Okay, anyway, about the Atelier of Healing, I really enjoyed the book. I thought the two of you did a wonderful job editing it. Just categorizing all the poems in all the chapters. And just the diversity of it was quite staggering, because I think you managed to do it because it's a E form. You managed to put a lot of voices and a lot of different poetic forms in it, and I really enjoyed it. There were some poets that I googled trying to find other poems. Yeah, some. Yeah, here I have a whole list of poets that I want to look at. So maybe you can walk us through the book.
Thank you, Jen, and thank you for the Atelier of Healing, and it's about trauma and recovery you mentioned, and we did have that wide range, just like Eric and you mentioned, everything from border crossings, people from different trying to transition, whether it was identity issues, so bullying, one, a heartbreak, marriage problems, body image. So lots of stuff, spirituality and the wrestling with it. So these are the chapters, and this whole tapestry that Nicole's talking about, sewing metaphor, the sewing you love, Jen, what we do that really uh, what we're trying to say is all these different kinds of pain and struggles are almost different shades of and how we navigate these in our lives. In our lives, right? So that's the tapestry image with the painting, the threads. So because we suddenly have writers from different countries just talking about very particular issues on countries like Hedy Habra wrote about, uh, I think that's pretty much it. If anyone wants to check out the website, they should go to Atelier of Healing, and they can check out the myriad stories. There are over 110 contributors with every kind of very sad and moving stories. And I really hope that people can read them and let the work resonate with their own experiences, right? So thank you, Jen. Thank you for the opportunity to share our project.
Yeah, check out Atelier. It's really awesome. I had a chance to look at it. Yeah, you see there's such an amazing diversity in narratives there, and such a freedom of expression. I was very moved by many of them. I guess I'll share my favorite quote, which is by Brene Brown. She's a researcher on shame, which is quite, I think it's quite closely related to trauma because we carry that shame, right? And so Brene Brown said that the bravest thing we can do is to own our story and to love ourselves through that story, through that process. Okay, she says that owning our story and loving ourselves through that process is the bravest thing that we can ever do. Yeah, I felt that that was something that I've held on to all these years of doing tapestry.
You asked us in one of your questions about the God, right? And claims our
Did
and
he
the
say?
body.
Sorry.
I think what was special in that quote, the idea that the speaker I is standing before everyone, and who's this other? Who's the witness to this person's trauma and pain? And the beauty of it is that it is a testament to the person having survived it, of having healed. And even something like Nicole's tapestry project with all those narratives are those remnants and marks and traces, are those wounds that are a testimony to all these survivors, right?
Okay, for those who didn't catch that, Desmond was referring to a quote from the foreword of the book that starts from Tagore, that goes, "When I stand before thee at the day's end, thou shalt see my scars and know that I had my wounds and also my healing." So from what I gathered from what Desmond said, it was this idea of surviving and being proud of your healing process and also your wounds. And I think that's really empowering, like to take it and to like what Eric is saying to me now on WhatsApp: continue free writing poetry or fiction, don't judge yourself, release the pain, and join other events of Poetry Festival Singapore. Thank you so much. Okay, that is from Eric, Dr. Eric Valles. Okay, so thank you everyone for joining us. If you've made it so far, well done, congratulations, and join our other Poetry Festival Singapore events. All right, thank you everybody.
Thanks, Jen. Thanks, everyone.